So, last talk of the day, always a tricky one to fill, especially with such excellent talks beforehand. It's been a really good day. Sometimes being in this position is that you are relied upon to be someone who can draw it all together and make a really good ending. I think it's because I have a tendency to talk a lot and will overshoot my time. So, as Daisy said, yes, I work for the archaeology section of North Yorkshire. I'm also involved in research with York University, and one of our more recent projects, part of what I'm working on, I've just finished quite a long-winded project on the Viking camps of the Great Army, and that's feeding into something looking at the use of metalwork in Scandinavian England and Scandinavian Britain. So this talk partly comes on as in another way from last year. I have to start this with a thank you and an apology to two friends. Hilda last year said, can you talk about these things? Can we have something about these things? I thought, yes, that does actually fit in with this. But also I have to apologise to Astrid, because Astrid gets teased an awful lot by the fact that I chop up beautiful things. And so I have to apologise to her for the fact that every time I destroy something gorgeous, she gets tagged in it.
So grateful for that.
Credit Matt Bunker.
You said you did not bring the axe. Not to hear. No, not to hear.
So, because always cite your sources. Everyone's done it today, it's a good thing to do. I've also, because I'm trying to go through quite an involved subject in quite a short time, I've got some other papers to look at. These are ones that have led very heavily into what my research is on at the moment. I put these up on the VALHAll forum last night as PDF, so you can go and find these. I might put another couple up as well. Einar Marie Heen Pettersson has done a lot of pieces which are available on Internet Archaeology, so free to go to through the ADS. She's got some excellent work on this, and also Cormac Bork has done a look at some of these in Ireland. I might put some more up. These are two excellent papers to go and read on this subject. They are on the forum, and Leah will make that available to everyone. So if you want to look into more about what I'm talking about, these are the places to go to. Insular metalwork. Yes, what is it? So I'm specifically talking about British and Irish pieces. They are commonly of copper alloy, almost always of copper alloy, generally heavily gilded, sometimes tinned. They're intensely decorated. Chip carving or repoussé decoration, designs of interlace and knotwork, of intertwined beasts, of tight vine scrolls. A lot of enamelling is seen on some of the Irish pieces. They are very, very recognisable. They're also very recognisable as being an insular thing. We talk, this is Webster and Backhouse's description, Northern Britain as a cultural province. This kind of ties in with what Mary was talking about and with our idea of home. The medieval church, the early medieval church, was incredibly mobile. And we don't tend to bring that into what we do very much. We think of early conversions of Irish monks heading eastward, you know, Iona in Lindisfarne and these foundations, but Oisin Plum particularly has done a lot of work on how mobile Pictish and Northern British clerics were heading westwards. And the interchange, the interaction of the church, the amount of material that moved around is incredible. I come from Durham, the Stonyhurst Gospel, the Cuthbert Gospel from there. The binding material is sumac-dyed North African goat skin, almost certainly imported as a specialist bookbinding product from North Africa. The church had huge networks and people moved around a lot. So in terms of this cross-fertilisation of monastic workshops and monastic ideas, you get a very similar product being produced in Tarbat, in Lindisfarne, in Hartlepool, as you would in Ireland. You do also get some of the later Anglo-Saxon true hiddle style coming into insular metalwork, but not so much. because it's ecclesiastical, some of this stuff is quite old. Now, this ties into the next point, that insular metalwork is one of the archaeological markers of the start of Viking activity in Scandinavia, particularly in Norway. Now, Caroline and Simon will remember when we were at uni, this was very much a grinding point in early medieval studies. Bjorn Myrna had suggested, well, seeing as this stuff's so old, are we sure that the Viking Age really starts with the raid and the Is it a century beforehand? Some of that's been resolved. Pretty much all of it's been resolved, particularly because things like the Leinster Hoard and the Galway Hoard have turned up early Frankish crystal balls in clearly later assemblages. Church treasuries hung on to stuff for a long time, and they also produced stuff that didn't change. There is a fascinating little strap end from the settlement at Flixborough in Lincolnshire, which is a sheet of tinned bronze which has been cut off an insular bucket, and you can tell it's from a 9th century context in a 9th century style, but it's decorated in red enamelled latten artwork, an Iron Age artwork. It's clearly been converted by a great army by a great army warrior or someone in the Great Army. Lost it there, but churches produce stuff in the same style, in the same workshop for a vast amount of time. This is what we do, this is how we do it. So some of it can be quite old when it turns up in Scandinavia. It is also a marker of the start of Viking activity, which is one of the reasons I'm interested in it. It's one of these things where you can pinpoint something in the archaeological record. And yeah, distinctive and very highly prized. It occupies a very special position in Scandinavian society at the time. One of those reasons is probably because of how incredibly detailed some of the artwork is, and this is something you can't even appreciate in a museum. There was an exhibition years ago, The Work of Angels. Yeah. So, Killoran Bay weights. Some of us have hefted a set of weights. Yeah, the scales are not big. This is that weight. This, thank you, Adam, for allowing me to use this picture. Hold up your hand, Adam. That's that being held in that hand. This lead piece is not even 2 centimetres long, which means that some of the lines on here, on this cast piece of metalwork, are 0.5 millimetre wide. It is phenomenal stuff. Way in advance of what was available in Scandinavia at the time, to be honest, way in advance of what was available in much of northwestern Europe. So there is a prestige value attached to this stuff. Now, when it starts turning up in Scandinavia, I use prestige imports here. That's not stepping around. One of the things to consider is that it's easy to compartmentalise all this stuff. And to say, if this is in Scandinavia, it's the result of raiding. Various people have pointed out that sites like Borg in Lofoten have assemblages which actually, when you look at all the pieces, they make up a complete set of ecclesiastical metalwork. So they could be related to missioning. They could be people being sent out with all this material. So Egil Mikkelsen is the most recent person to discuss this. There's an excellent book called Looting or Missioning, which is well worth a view over, if only for the really nice pictures. We all like a nice picture. And so you get all this stuff turning up in Scandinavia, particularly in Norway, from the start of the late 8th, early 9th century. While saying that some of it could be because you have missioning going on, in the end, most of it seems to turn up being used for secular purposes. Buckets, titular buckets and ladles, they're very good for serving drinks. We have picture stones showing the Valkyrie, inverted commas, figures serving drinks in them. We have swords, weighing material. All these pieces all arrive in Scandinavia as prestige imports. So, why? Well, we think some of it is showing contact with abroad. You are home and you're abroad, as you are heading across the Western Sea, you are showing involvement with trade, with connections, with Viking activity, and all the kudos that comes in late 8th, early 9th century Scandinavia from military activity. You're in a place, in a time period, where there could be very rapid advancement up the social hierarchy if you were a successful Viking. Now, one of the things we will loop back to is something I go on about a lot. I think it's actually Gabor Thomas who said it first. The more successful a Viking you were, the less Scandinavian you looked. That's part of what ties in with our research on the Great Army. People spent decades looking for Scandinavians in Britain. Well, there weren't any, because either they weren't Scandinavians when they started with a Viking army, or by the time they arrived to Britain, they'd long since dropped any Scandinavian identity. So a lot of this is connected with activity overseas. Now, these items all have uses, but looted bits of metalwork, stuff torn off shrines, stuff taken off crosses, off book covers, that does not have a practicable use in Scandinavian society. So I'm using this as Louis Anstad's idea, the sentence here sums it up perfectly. This stuff was seen to have a value, and because of that, you had to find a use for it. Now, I find that an interesting thing. I've said your horse harness fittings as well. Yes, you get horse harness turning up as horse harness. There are things like Gaussel, which have complete sets of very beautiful horse harness. But I think 70% of the pieces of horse harness, insular horse harness in Norway, have been converted into jewellery. So, a necessary way of giving this stuff a function. How does this function occur? Conversion into brooches is a big starter. Displaying it on clothing. Now, one of the first things to point out here is this is, with one questionable exception from Hedeby, this is all from female gendered clothing. It's also quite difficult to find this stuff sometimes. Some of it, a lot of it was, because it's copper alloy, it's been converted by putting ironwork on it. Ironwork corrodes. So often the fittings are missing. Sometimes they've also been conserved away. A lot of these things were from graves or assemblages that were found excavated in the 1800s, the early 1900s, and people had very different concepts about what you were doing. So some of it takes a bit of searching for. This is one of my favourites because I didn't bother putting a picture of the back here. There is no trace of a pin on this piece of harness. This is a strap distributor, would have gone out these ways. But the preserved textile on the back has a hole where the pin was. So that is a fascinating little insight of, one, how this is being used. Also, flat. This isn't a closing brooch. This is being worn almost as a badge, which I think starts to tell us something about how it's seen in society. Some of it is not being used as a functional dress accessory, but it's being used as a display piece, a purely display piece. So, that one. This is one of my favourite. This is probably a book plate. Now on here, you can very definitely see not only iron staining, where a pin has been set across the back, but also up here secondary holes punched through. Obviously the pin has in fact corroded away the plate over here. This is one of the more obvious pieces. Sorry, I'm trying to move around. I know it's going to confuse the camera, but I realise I stand forward and I'm blocking you guys. I apologise. If you want to shout, get out of the way, feel free. This one was recovered from a central position across the chest in a grave. So you're looking at something here which is being used as that classic third brooch that you get in so many female gendered assemblages. This was recovered, I think, with a pair of P37 brooches, so it's pretty early. Early Viking activity and the sign of being connected with Viking activity. Other ones are different. This is a piece, this is the one I was saying was questionable. Sorry, it's not Hedeby. Misspoke earlier, it's Kaupang. And this is from Blindheim's excavations in Kaupang in the 50s. This one is associated with a boat burial, and it's put with the male gendered items of the boat burial. Now, some of us know male and female gendered items can swap around boat burials depending on what they're interpreted as. Ballin Abbey on Islay is a classic example where there was a collection of arrows. Arrowheads were found with the female burial, but were put with the male burial because that's a masculine item. And then they were reinterpreted, and someone said, well, actually, those are heckles off a weaving comb. Oh, back over to her. So it's interesting how this stuff moves around. This is quite a modelled burial. So this may be associated with the male gendered grave, but it also may well be from the two female gendered graves in the same boat burial. We're not sure. Now, you can see slightly reconstructed a photograph of it as it came out the ground, and also one of Blindheim's drawings, which very clearly shows iron fittings on the back. That's it now. So not only has, unfortunately, some of Blindheim's stuff due diligence wasn't necessarily taken with a lot of the conservation. Again, this happens. We were talking about egg earlier. The egg hilt on display in the National Museum of Scotland, you only see one side of it because the other side was badly damaged by a conservation attempt in the 50s. This one, as you can see, a lot of it is decayed, but also the ironwork has been cleaned off. People are interested in its primary function as a bookplate. They're not interested in its secondary function as a brooch. Some of us here know Susanna Harris, who is dealing with the textiles around the Galway Hoard Cup. The fight she has to preserve the textiles, because obviously a museum wishes to display a beautiful silver cup, not covered in corroded bits of linen. So this happens. It's hard to identify sometimes, but sometimes it's quite easy. This is one of my favourite pieces, so I put it in anyway. This is almost certainly an altar plate. That is 7.5 centimetres long. It's covered with these rather beautiful little otters. So we think it's probably to do with Cuthbert. There is one of the hagiographic stories of Cuthbert is him praying all night in the sea and then emerging to the shore and sea otters coming to dry him off. What you can see here is an original piercing there and then a little stud there. Now if I flick to the next one, very clear part of the brooch catch, ironwork put across the back. And you can see where the piercings have gone through, secondary to the original design, to make that work. So some of these are actually quite easy to see. Now, although that's on the smaller side, what I've mainly shown you here are pieces which are quite large. We think they will display pieces, outer clothing. You do still get some smaller ones, as you can see. Again, clearly preserved, at least on this one, is part of the pin catch. This is, again, one of the few where things were definitely plotted in the right place, and the plots recorded from Blindheim's excavations. And this was found effectively around the collarbone, the shoulder, the clavicle area, up here. So it's probably an under-tunic closure used similar to the little disc brooches, the Bordeaux-style bear's head disc brooches. Again, part of a book binding. Cut off, converted. So other uses are also connected with display, but they're not quite the same. You've got two pieces of horse harness here. These are strap distributors again. And you can see very clearly the secondary piercings. Now this is Heen Peterson, who's done a lot of the work putting this stuff together. These are found either in the chest area or in the girdle area. So some of these could have been hanging from the belt. This is something you see in, we don't tend to pick it up a lot, but it's something you see actually in quite a few insular Scandinavian burials. The Peel Castle burial has an ammonite and 2 amber beads hanging off the belt. And belt display seems to be, girdle display seems to be something. The thing I want to highlight here is that although the arms have been taken off this one, they've been taken off very neatly, and they're respecting the design. So that's an important aspect of how this stuff is used. They are keeping it, if not whole, then as an understandable item. There is care being taken with it. There is a value in being able to display something like that, and a use as a display item like that. You get these with secondary holes, you get them with rivets sometime, or even iron rings. So they are being clearly worn as suspended items. There's another one. This is also probably a book plate. I think this may have been the one that was mentioned last year, I can't remember. But you can see an original piercing and then an iron rivet where the secondary fitting has been put on after it's been cut in half. Now this is corroded, but you can still see that the panels of the design have been respected when it's been cut up. Now the cutting up like that might be significant. It might be to do with a particular thing of division, which we'll come on to later. Still get this in what we would now think of as Britain. But the areas which I think we need to think of as insular Scandinavia. Now, this ties in with our theme of home. Our concepts of where an area is. As was said by Mary earlier, that this is all about peoples, it's not regions. Where your people are is your land, your area, your home. And so there are parts of what we think of now as Scotland, of the Irish Sea area, which would have been so Scandinavian as to almost be indistinguishable from Scandinavia at the time. These two I'm particularly fond of. These are from Carnarvonne on Colonsay. They are clasps, hinges for a strap off the side of a little house-shaped portable reliquary. We saw one of those earlier on the overall view. So these have been taken off, and if you go to one of the original plans, this is the female gendered grave here. The crosses mark where they were found. They also have corrosion where that hinge point is, iron, so showing where there must have been a pin inserted. And on the original piece, part of a linen cord. The linen cord was recorded in the original dig as running down to 2 beads. So they are being used, I'm going to use you two as examples, they are being used to replace oval brooches. Insular adaptation. You don't actually see anything of that kind of activity in Scandinavia, but it's the same projection, the same activity going on. Now, we've looked at, oh sorry, there are still others. Again, these are issues that we have to deal with. This cord, which you can see very clearly on the original illustration, isn't there now. All cleaned away. No one's interested in textiles in the 1800s. And other pieces get very much moved through. Where are we? There we are. So this is the Westness grave. I think, again, most of us have seen this at some point. Very interesting assemblage. 2 Anglo-Saxon strap ends in there, things like that. Found when someone was burying a cow in 1963. So, not the best recovery, but there is this very, very beautiful plaque in there. This, we think, again, was found centre of the torso. So, some kind of closure. You can see secondary piercings in it. It's complete, or was complete, before it was hit by a digger bucket. Hasn't had an iron pin on the back. There are problems associated with the whole of the Westness Cemetery, and it's not been published yet, other than in a brief paper form. There are 2 papers on this, the pin, from the grave. Nobody mentions that. I wasn't actually aware that there was still the remains of a pin on the back of it until Adrian Maldonado mentioned it in his book Crucible of Nations a couple of years ago. So, attention sometimes drawn to the beautiful thing, the really beautiful things, and other things get discarded. However, moving past that, this piece, some of these things are stray finds. This one is from Dumfries and Galloway. This is actually a churchyard find. You can see it's a tiny little bit of bookbinding. It has been cut in such a way that the design has been respected, and there's a secondary piercing where it's been used as a pendant of some form. That is just included as a stray find. I think it's in a private collection. It was last properly published in the Making of England book in 91. If we found this in Scandinavia, there would be unquestionably linked to early Viking activity. Because it's found in Dumfries, it's a stray find. So also our concepts of home apply to how we interpret these things. That's something just to tuck in your back of your mind as living historians, as reenactors. Our concepts of where the people are affect our interpretations of use. Now moving across to stuff in England, stuff in Ireland, outside what we'd call insular Scandinavia. This is part of the Llanmullor assemblage, which I was showing some people earlier. Fantastic assemblage of stuff from the River Blackwater in Ireland. Hundreds of pieces, really not well known, deserves to be better known. These are actually quite nice ones in terms of that assemblage, but you can still see the yellow enamelled L-shaped paint frames there have been hacked across. It's been torn up, it's been broken up. And the whole assemblage is full of beautiful metalwork that has been twisted, broken, ripped off books, torn off shrines. What you see with the use of insular metalwork when you have Viking activity in Britain is very different. This stuff isn't being used for display. They are ripping it up, chopping it up, sometimes very finely fragmenting it. And we think it's used for trade, for raw materials, sometimes a currency. I'm going to go through a few of these uses. The point I want to really circle around here is that the way this stuff is treated is fundamentally different here as opposed to in any kind of concept homeland. Hack metal. This is from Llanmullor. So what I was saying, that's the top off a portable shrine. So only a very short distance away, two clasps have been turned very carefully into substitute brooches, whereas just south of Ulster, someone has gone and ripped that apart. Bits from a fitting, that's the terminal of a Pictish penannular brooch. That's from Fishergate. You can see not only has it been taken off the loop, but also the projections have been hacked off. They're quite small, easy to take off with the chisel. Some of this stuff is being used in very, very tiny fragments. Horse harnesses, pretty brutally taken apart. We think this is being used basically as a metal resource. It's quite good metal. Certainly there's a certain type of pin that the Great Army seemed to collect, where analysis of the metal at Southampton identified that that type of pin was being made out of brass and not bronze. And brass was the favoured material for Scandinavian jewellery production. So they are clearly identifying alloys, picking and choosing, but just, this is your classic Viking, isn't it? Tear it apart. Some things, now this is what I wanted to say about that divided plate that we looked at earlier. This is, over here, something that's come about from our Great Army project and tracing the Great Army across the landscape. I absolutely adore this. So this is a book plate from Whitby. That's just to give you a comparison of what this probably was. These two pieces were found 40 kilometres apart. Now we've only got a drawing of this one. It's one of Kevin Leahy's pieces. Kevin was very, very conscientiously recording finds and metal detected finds in Lincolnshire and North Lincolnshire particularly from the early 90s. Kevin is, if there is a force behind setting up the Portable Antiquities scheme, it's Kevin. Fantastic bloke, and the contribution he's made to just grassroots understanding of this kind of stuff cannot be overestimated. This one is Dave Haldenby's. You can see a beautiful chisel mark across there. Someone has gone down the centre in half. Not so easy to see the breaks here, but you can see that even then, chisel cut there, it's gone off centre. You could have divided that in another way. You've just kind of gone between it. Both sites where these were found have got the signature of Great Army activity. So this division of a piece may have been, if you're dividing it up, it may have been to share out, to have pieces divided. If it's prestige items, then you are sharing it across your warband, across your group. This is another use you get, these inset weights. This is one of the things I'm working on at the moment. We don't need to go over it too much, but you can see that they are just little bits of metal hacked up any old way. This, you can just about see the square on there. That's one of the little plates off, again, one of those portable shrines. Now, I dealt with that one when it came in, and the fine line detail of that is even finer than that piece from Killoran Bay. It is staggering. You can see a centimetre scale up at the top. It's tiny. This, probably a pinhead. There are comparisons with that. These pieces, no idea, they've just been chopped up, set into weights. Now, we think these are used for weighing bullion, weighing metalwork. It's clearly a metal weight economy. Whether these were used for, there's been suggestions these are used to weigh out the material that you are hacking up. Maybe they could be just to personalise them. Lots of reasons, and I don't really need to go into that. It's just, you can see a very different use to what is happening in Scandinavia. And then this ties in with some of my research for the Great Army. Tiny, tiny pieces. You can see, I haven't managed to put a scale to these, but you can see how small some of these are. Little fragments of decorated metalwork. Now, one of the things we think that this stuff is being used for in the camps is as a form of currency or a commodity money. If I said those larger pieces you are trading with, you're effectively almost using those pieces as ingots. They are a lump of a good metal. This is perhaps, it's an inexact analogy, but this is your small change. And it is, in the same way that it's a prestige item in Scandinavia, part of the reason for chopping this up and using it as currency over here might be because the decoration was a mark of quality. It could also have a social aspect, that the decoration shows that it's been gained by Viking activity and military service, and that kind of activity was very important within society. I've got a couple of things to show as a comparison. The top, I'm afraid it's a bent item, so you can't see it brilliantly, but that is a disc-headed pin. You can see two piercings, one has been put in because the first one's torn out. This would have been part of a linked pin suite of 2 or 3 pins joined by a chain, which seem to be worn on female-gendered Anglo-Saxon dress. Some of the stuff we've been doing with the Great Army also is redating some of this, links back to what I was saying earlier, that a lot of these things were previously dated on art historical grounds, so these are thought to be 8th century. We've got them turning up all over 9th century sites now, so it's refining some of this dating. I haven't put in the comparisons, broad topic, big picture, but these are all identifiable as fragments of the same kind of pinhead. You can see, particularly on these two, they've been very clearly and deliberately chopped. This one's plain. These are decorated and gilded. And one of the proposals we're bringing into this talk is, if the decoration is a sign of prestige and quality, then the lack of decoration on the same functional item makes it less prestigious, loses its quality, loses its social implications. Similarly, this is a find from Hampshire of a Weech 31C brooch. It's a form of late Anglo-Saxon brooch. You can see one being worn in the Book of Kells. That's just to give you an idea of what these look like. And then we've got these three over here. Now I'm afraid, again, dealing with metal detected assemblages that were compiled over time, some of our photographs aren't great. You may have to take my word for it, it's the best I could get. That one's plain. That one's lightly decorated. That's covered in gilded Greek key designs, which is the most heavily chopped up. Now, what I'm doing here, I know this looks like a very small assemblage, and it is here. I don't have time to go through everything. I mean, I would, but what we are seeing is this kind of action going on, that there seems to be a different expression of value associated with this metalwork in Britain. So, what does this actually tell us? Sheehan's rather lovely line there, that one of the most important things... Oh, I've got 10 minutes, I've gone tearing through, I'll keep it going. I was worried that I'd just, fill this full of photographs of pretty things, and I was going to just... So, the basic thing to look at is that we've seen all this stuff being, worn as badges, being worn as large brooches, being worn on girdles or pendants. Its big display value, but its actual intrinsic value is really low. Little bits of gilded copper alloy. Sometimes quite heavily chopped up. But it's imbued with a social value. However, that value changed where people were. Now, as Daisy said earlier, one of the things that I've been involved in is looking at Viking forces. And the way we are very much conceptualising Viking forces now is that they are mobile polities in their own right. It's Chris Coymans who's really talked about this, and the idea of hierarchy. You would serve a lord. Military service was to a person, it was not to a place. The people are your land. And some of these Viking forces, they're in the field 15, 20 years. The Great Army was clearly compartmentalised, moved, different people came across. There's forces from Ireland, there's forces from Frisia, there's forces from Francia. You've got three forces on the Selme and the Seine and the Loire, who are all recorded as leaving northern France in 864 and coming across to Kent. And then that's the Great Army who campaigns here for the next 15 years. So your sense of home can be very different to what we would think of. Your people, your identity, is your group. It's a form of social or ethnic expression. This jumps back to what I was saying about our search for Scandinavians. Particularly in England, there's been a long... I think somebody characterised it in a paper a long time ago as being a long and fruitless search for Scandinavians, as if that would magically resolve everything. Scandinavian behaviour. These people wouldn't have thought of themselves as any less Scandinavian if they were in the Great Army or if they were in Norway. But the way they treated this stuff, very different, according to their situation. Now, the other thing that's really interesting is you get to the early 10th century, stops. All this use of insular metalwork, it's like someone turns off a tap, completely vanishes from the archaeological record. Now, that might just be related to the fact that there was only ever a finite resource of this. And after 150 years of Viking raiding, they might have mined out that seam. The reason we have all those beautiful hole objects I showed you earlier is because they turn up in graves in Scandinavia. We don't have house-shaped shrines over here. We have ones from Copenhagen, we've got ones from monasteries in Italy. all those beautiful sitular buckets, they turn up out of graves in Björka and Skye and places like that. This is all, it's not in Britain. So they may have used it all up. But also, Britain stopped being alien after the treaty, the final part of it. People were settling already, clearly, but the final part of it is the treaty with Alfred and Guthrum. The land is partitioned, and an area then becomes, in a form, Scandinavian. Yes, the material culture is very different. Yes, it's an Anglo-Scandinavian identity. And yes, there is a point that you could argue about who was here, what. It's, however, there is an element to play in there that if this stuff has an appeal, has a prestige, has a social value because it's connected to vigorous military conquest aboard, well, when that conquest is over, where's the prestige? New lands to conquer, new places to go. You do, it's got to be said, see an upsurge of Frankish stuff turning up in Scandinavia at the time. And then to kind of, should have maybe looked at this more than summing up. These, I'm not going to read through them, but this is very much a kind of division of how this stuff is used. Provincial Scandinavia, Viking activity, uses it in a very different way compared to Scandinavia and Insular Scandinavia. The main point, again, is Heen Pettersson's line that this stuff is chopped up, either with regard or with absolute lack of regard. Almost to a point you look at some of the pieces in things like the Blackwater assemblage, where they, it is vandalism. You didn't need to just wallop that with an axe.
That's what Ashley said.
Yeah. So what does this tell us for reenactment and living history? Well, I mean, these are just a few thoughts. I'm not drawing some huge conclusions here, but one of the things is that I don't think this is in any way purely to do with reenactment and living history. I think this is a thing across society. We've got it from everything from, our fiat coinage to D&D. There's a hierarchy of value of metals. And well, that's nice in copper alloy, but it's better in silver, the same thing. Or that's better in gold. Well, to a degree. But equally, some of this stuff, in terms of the metal, is very low value. But the associations, the social connotations, raise it out of that. So, had a conversation with a few people recently about the use of iron belt buckles in reenactment, and people saying, well, it's a low-class item, it's iron. The Kiloran Bay boat grave, the most well-equipped boat burial in the British Isles, the grave at Repton 511, the Ivar the Boneless grave. These are people who are carrying swords on iron belt buckles. It's just an item. We don't have those associations. So it's good to break away from those associations sometimes. Recognise that a Scandinavian identity, which we often use as a tit for tat for a Viking identity, that's a whole other talk, often communicated by wearing items that aren't Scandinavian. If you're looking for your classic Scandinavian in a grave in Britain, it's very hard to find them. Even Adams cum Witten graves, yes, they have some classic stuff, but there are belts which have Irish C-type boss cap rivets. There are E3 strap ends. If you're playing Trix Bingo, there you are. Which are of Scandinavian derived from the Great Army. These are things that you don't see in Scandinavia, even though Cum Witten is often put forward as being a Viking cemetery. And one of the things that I think for reenactors, people, I said this last year as well, people took time and thought about the identities that they were conveying, about who they were showing they were. Heen Pettersson again, she has a beautiful line in a paper about the adoption of penannular brooches in Norway, where she says that you're conveying with ringed pins and penannular brooches. These are an Irish fashion, comes to Norway in the 8th century, and she says people could read an identity being projected by those as easily as we can read someone's identity by the band t-shirt they're choosing to wear now. I see you in your Motorhead shirt. I know who you are. I know your group. Home is a people. You're conveying this idea of who your people is by these things. As reenactors, we tend to have kind of like a chocolate box approach sometimes to fittings. It's easy to do. We've all done it. But people at the time took care, and it's something to just bear with. The concept of home sometimes isn't the place, but it's the people you're associating with, and you show you're part of those people by what you wear. And I think that's probably it for me. Yeah. I mean, I'll go on for hours.
Well, I'm not going to let him rabbit on too much more, but we can take a couple of questions if anyone would like to ask them.
Yes, I have a question. So, the fact that they quit, using the insular pieces, that would pretty much coincide with sort of when they stopped using old brooches over in Scandinavia, right?
No, it's a little. You get the insular pieces with oval brooches. About the time.
Yeah.
You stop using it about the time P51s start becoming very popular.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, that's yeah. But do you think that might have to do with sort of a broader identity as Christian, for instance, when Christianity was introduced quite forcefully to Scandinavian countries, certain Scandinavian countries, that you just didn't go ahead and steal stuff from churches and monasteries in a friendly religious nation. So.
Possibly. In all honesty, I suspect it's got more to do with state formation. That this stuff is being used to signal almost small area warband affiliation. Viking activity is merely an outward expression of something that Salme and places like that showed. This was going on across Scandinavia a long time before anybody put a sail on a longboat. They could head out again now. And all these objects, a lot of these objects are Christian, and we don't see them with any Christian associations in the context they're being used in Scandinavia. So if it hasn't carried a Christian association before, obviously that can change. But if objects move through categories, it can there are glass bosses. Dave Petts has published ones recently from Lindisfarne. There's one from Dundee Hillfort. We see them as gaming pieces. If you go to Dublin, they are pinheads. If you go to the places where they're being produced in Ireland, they're being produced for ecclesiastical book plates. The full gamut of use for the same object. So the object doesn't necessarily carry the association. I think, good point, and as with anything in archaeology, yes, maybe. but personally, if I have to put a punt on it, I see it more as trying to make a unified state identity under a king rather than a small. Like I said, a lot of collecting this stuff is connected with people who can rise very rapidly through the social strata. It's one of the things that Vikings and Ragnar Lothbrok got quite right. If you were a successful warband leader, sky's the limit. Once you have a king over an entire nation, they don't want that happening.
I know Jim Pettersson sometimes writes about, yes, they could be taken forcibly, and some of this stuff is obviously something like the literary boxes that would not have been something you could buy.
Yeah.
But she also theorizes a bit about some of the things might have been that artisans were producing for the ecclesiastical market, and we could also possibly buy some of that. Is that something you looked into?
Yeah, well, a lot of these items are very similar because they're being produced in ecclesiastical workshops. So,
not really something you could trade for.
These have. I haven't got a picture to show you with them on, but these have little lugs on the back. They have little projecting lugs at right angles with holes in. These are harness fittings. That's how you fit them to the harness. If you open up those shrines, the same pieces are secured with cotter pins through the lugs.
Yeah.
So they're making, this comes back to what we were just saying now, Astrid, they're making the same object of the same physical form that can be put on a shrine or a bookplate or a horse harness.
Because the varnish grade is one of the grades using insular metalwork, and that's little cross-shaped, something that might have been a bookplate before, or processional cross, before somebody acquired it, and then put an iron pin on that.
Now just to chase, I know with the hands up, sorry, just to chase that one up, one of the other aspects is you can see where some of these things are converted at some point. Some of the things are so close that we think there might have been workshops converting these. And some of the pieces from Bjerke appear to have been converted in Norway, which Blindheim suggested actually showed, because these things are prestigious, a trade in converted pieces. You want to be in our gang? There we are. So that can also happen as well. Daisy, pick people.
Okay, I think that we can take 2 more. Okay, so we'll go with Kira at the back.
You've actually got the slide up for my question. So both of these examples, the whole is offset from this, what we would consider the centre. Modern frames like the symmetry, and that's why we put the beads in the same order. So like in this example, like are there more examples of an offset hole for the thing in it, or is it just piece by piece? Like there's not one.
There's a lot more examples of offset holes. The point being that the centre of this stuff is raised, whereas the areas that's thinner.
So it's part of the
I think
respecting the pattern and the thing that you're talking about.
It might just be thinner to get through.
Yeah. Oh,
So
yeah,
it
of course.
might just be ease of conversion. Some of it may actually just be that basic.
So it's not necessarily one or the other in different styles. It's literally case by case basis more than likely.
We value symmetry. We live in a machine-made age where everything is symmetrical. Roll over there made me a situla a few years ago. I wanted it because the knotwork design around the bands were absolutely terrible. Absolutely terrible.
I'm famous for terrible.
But we had to agree that you would do one side fixed because you just couldn't, and the other side bad. And that's to do with our modern minds. Not necessarily things that they thought of. I think things like that might just be because it's easier to get through a thinner piece of metal than a thicker.
All right, we can do one more, but there'll also be time afterwards. So at the back there.
Just a very quick question. It's just, this is the slide for me as well. It says here, found at upper torso or pelvis. Is there a gender where you find more of the female?
Again, just like I said with the other pieces, the other pieces, it's female gendered. They're all female gendered.
All of them?
Yeah. There are some buckles or straps.
The badge one you're on about?
Yes, they're all female gendered. Apart from this one. Yeah. But again, that might just be because of muddled excavation. One of the things is that boat burial is very confused, and they only really identified it as a group burial in post-ex. I've done that. I've certainly dug things and gone, no idea what I'm digging. And then after a while you go, oh, it's a ditch. So these things can be hard to muddle through. But yes, other than that, it's all on female gendered stuff. Now, obviously, things like the inset weights equally applied to both male and female gendered. So that kind of Viking and economic activity might be seen to be in a different sphere. Different form of display. But other than that, all of this is seen on female, all the dress accessories are seen on female gendered stuff.
Thank you.
So-
I've agreed one final one. Final.
Can I?
Yeah.
Okay, so I was talking to Ken Raven-Hedegaard, Danish brooch maker, and we talked about these trophy brooches that were made from the bookbindings and the Carolingian belt fittings, that sort of thing. Yes, exactly. And he mentioned that after a while, this turned into fashion. So you'd sort of use the shape of these original fittings that had been transformed, right?
Mm-hmm.
Reused. Then you just sort of made new pieces that sort of were copies of the original truffle brooch. Is that something that's particular to Scandinavia, or would you find that here too?
Wouldn't find it here, and you don't find it with these items.
No, okay.
Now, I think the trefoil brooch is a particular thing. You have something that starts off as a sword strap distributor.
Yeah.
So, used in one way. Now, when the first trefoil pieces you start seeing converted for use in Scandinavia, there is just likely to come up in male-gendered as female-gendered graves. And there's, is it Lavinga that has the figure which has a trefoil there?
Yeah.
It's being used as belt fitting. There are other ones which we interpret now as brooches which don't have anything on the back at all. They are just fittings of some kind. That becomes, in its own right, a female-gendered brooch.
Yes.
But with that you have, I think, a class of easily recognisable similar objects that get taken back to Scandinavia. All these are one-offs. These are individual pieces that are produced. You know, nobody was making job lots of these.
But you do get the square ones that have been off-cut. You know, you have the square ones that are just pieces of wood binding.
Mhm.
So they put a pin on the back. That's sort of the start of the square and brooches, right? And then you get those. Well, you do find.
I know. I don't disagree. I don't know enough to say that's the start of the square brooches, and you have other forms of square brooch. I mean, I can certainly see that piece that you bought here last year, with the little heads moving in, being very close to this kind of thing. But, you know, disc brooches turn up everywhere in lots of different occasions. I wouldn't want to say that I would absolutely be certain that the square brooches come from the book bindings. They may also come from Carolingian sword belt fittings as well, which we see a lot of that kind of stuff. Is Daisy getting out her shotgun?